Back in 2015, I was doing research on the Paddock family, which I started back in the 1970s. I learned a little bit about my third great grandmother, Lucy Backus Paddock, and that she was buried out here in the cemetery. So in November of 2015, I came out here and found her grave, which happens to be over here. I found that my second great grandparents are also buried here. And that's how it all started, being here at the cemetery. The first settlers came in here in 1833. And by 1837, that's when a number of settlers were actually coming into this property and starting to farm it. So in 1836, this was considered McHenry County. And then in 1839, the state of Illinois divided McHenry County, made this Lake County. And then at that time, that's when the settlers were really starting to come in. And it wasn't until 1850 when townships were formed, and this became Avon Township. Well, the first burial here, before it was a cemetery, was that of Warren Scoville. He died in 1844. So he's actually the very first burial on this property. In 1847, is when this cemetery became designated Fort Hill Cemetery. The property originally was owned by Solomon Marble. He had a farm here. So he designated a little plot of land, which is where Warren Scoville is buried. And then in 1847, he designated this property as the Fort Hill Cemetery, and then deeded the property over to the county. This is the gravestone of Lucy Paddock. She is my third great grandmother, born in Connecticut. She lived in Barre, Vermont for a good number of years. She was married to Dr. Robert Paddock. After Dr. Paddock had died, Lucy and her son and daughter-in-law and their two kids bought some property out here in Grant Township, which is just down the road 2 miles on the corner of Route 120 and Fish Lake Road. That was back in 1855. Lucy died in 1860, and then this is where she is buried. Currently, I've been able to identify 48 veterans buried here in the Fort Hill Cemetery, of which I have located 2 that were in the War of 1812. I have 3 veterans that fought in the Civil War, and then the rest were either in World War I or World War II. I have 2 veterans who were killed in action. The first one was Lieutenant Arthur Whitney, who is buried out there. Lieutenant Arthur Whitney was killed in 1963 in Springfield, Missouri. And the second veteran that was killed in action was Carl Hagan Jr. He's over there on that side. And he was killed in Saigon in 1944 at the beginning of World War II. Also, we have here an Illinois State Senator, who is Senator Ray Paddock, who happens to be my great uncle. He is buried here. That's why we also have an American flag and a state of Illinois flag. So the flags that we have out here in the cemetery, the large flags, they represent Civil War soldiers or veterans from the War of 1812. When I first came out here, I wasn't really paying attention to the total cemetery. I was just so focused on looking for the Paddock gravestones, the grave markers. And it wasn't until August of 2017, 2 of my second cousins that I had met for the first time had come out here, and they called me and said, the condition of the cemetery is looking pretty bad. So I came out here to look at it myself, and actually saw that it was worse than what I saw 2 years prior to that. So that's when I decided to took it upon myself. I said, something has to be done to the cemetery because it looks like it's abandoned. I took a bunch of pictures. I met with Terry Wilkie from Avon Township. He's the supervisor there. And I showed him the pictures that I had, and he agreed something has to be done. So now we had to find out who owned the property. He did some research through Lake County, and found that the county actually had ownership and had the deed to the property since 1847. They eventually, in the spring of 2018, the county transferred the deed of the property over to the township. And then that's when I really got involved with cleaning up the cemetery and getting things started for example, the county had hired a company to come out to clear out all the underbrush, to cut down the trees that were here growing next to gravestones. And that happened in 2018. And then in 2019, I had heard about a man from Monticello, Illinois. His name was John Hyder. And John has a company called RIP Limited. He is certified. He is the only person certified by the state of Illinois to preserve gravestones. So the county hired him to come out, and in July of 2019, he took about 100 of these gravestones that were broken, fallen over. He preserved them, standing them straight up, putting them back together if they were broken. And then after he was done in July of 2019, I began cleaning the gravestones. I'm still continually doing that today. I've got about 180 gravestones done, and I still have probably about 140 more to go. Well, after the brush was removed, I found that there were more gravestones. So what I started to do was photograph each gravestone. And then I went on to a website called findagrave.com, and I found there were probably about 75 memorials that were from Fort Hill Cemetery. So what I did was then I added more memorials. So now I've got close to 400 memorials on the findagrave.com website. After the brush was cleared, I found John Cooper, that his gravestone, the whole thing had been tipped over and it was laying partially buried into the ground. And so from there, last year in 2019, that's when John Hyder's team, his crew, they actually uprighted the gravestone. And then this spring, I started cleaning the gravestone. I knew John Cooper had been married twice. His first wife, Ann, is buried next to him in the smaller marker. And I knew his second wife had to be buried somewhere, but I didn't know where she was buried. When I started cleaning the gravestone, which took about 2.5 hours, when I got to the base of it, and on the back side, as I'm cleaning it, I saw her name, which I could not see before. So now it verified she was buried with her husband, John. So back around March, my wife Ruth and I had talked about putting American flags to display at each of the gravestones of the veterans buried here in Fort Hill Cemetery. Then I took it one step further and said, since I have 2 veterans from the War of 1812, I have 3 veterans from the Civil War, and I also have 2 veterans that were killed in action, I wanted to do something more than just an 8 by 12 inch flag on a wooden stick. So I went ahead and bought the 3 by 5 foot flags that you see flying here on 10-foot poles, designating the Civil War, the War of 1812, and those that were killed in action. So then I got the stimulus money from the federal government. And from that, I also decided, since we did not have a sign for the Fort Hill Cemetery displayed out by the road, I decided to have a sign made. And that was the sign and the flags we put up just prior to Memorial Day. So that kind of put the finishing touches on the Fort Hill Cemetery.
On behalf of the Daughters of the American Revolution, Ansel Brainerd Cook chapter of Libertyville, Illinois, we would like to present you, Vern, with the National Society Historic Preservation Recognition Award.
Thank you, Vern.
Well, thank you very much, Pam. Pam, this has been an honor. To me, this is a very prestigious award because when I started doing this, I never thought I'd be sitting here today getting an award for what I'm doing. It's just something I've enjoyed doing. Keeps me busy since I've been retired. but I'm truly honored to receive this award from the Daughters of American Revolution, and appreciate both of you being here and presenting it to me. Thank
Well,
you.
we appreciate you restoring Fort Hill, one stone at a time, one cemetery at a time.
And that it's true. Thank you. Thank you very much.